Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. When we talk about emptiness, we usually focus on anatta, not self, that is the subjective aspect of emptiness. But there is also the emptiness of the Dhammas. The objective side is also empty. That which sees and knows is empty, and that which knows and experiences is empty. And what do we essentially mean by this, saying something is empty? It means it's empty of self-existent reality or substance. All the 5 Condos are empty. That is, all the constituents of the body-mind, and actually all of external reality as well. The body, rupa, is the khandha that's most coarse. It's that which is composed of the 4 elements. And the external world is mostly a rupa khandha as well. And in the sutta where the Buddha gives metaphors for the emptiness of the khandhas, he compares the body materiality to sea foam. That is something that has an apparent structure and solidity and permanence, but ends up being very insubstantial upon closer examination. Materiality in the Abhidhamma system is said to consist of 4 elements, which are known in English by the names earth, water, fire, and air. But it's important to understand that these names are labels. They're not to be taken literally. They rather refer to qualities. The earth element is the quality of hardness and also extension, taking up of space. Water element is related to the quality of form, taking of a shape. And the metaphor is that water poured into a jar takes the shape of the jar. Air is motion, mobility. Fire is heat, warmth, energy. So these aren't references to stuff, to any kind of substance. That's only a creation of the mind. When the mind comes in contact with these 4 elements in different combinations, then it perceives things that are hard and have a shape, have either motion or stillness, have either hot or cold. And these are qualities that are imposed, in a sense, imposed on reality by perception. Perception is another one of the aggregates, and is compared by the Buddha to mirage in the desert. You see some shimmering in the air, and the mind, out of maybe a desire, imagines an oasis that isn't there. Perception works that way. It creates a reality out of incoming information, signals essentially. And that reality created by perception is the only reality that we actually directly experience. It has only a very indirect relationship to any theoretical external reality. The sense organs perceive various limited signals from the outside world, and these are passed on to the mind, and perception creates a simulation. It's easy enough to see many examples of how perception can be fooled. Just think of optical illusions as a good example. How the mind creates something that isn't there based on limited information. The feelings are also empty. They're compared to soap bubbles. The soap bubbles can blow up and can seem very large and significant, but they're really without any inherent substance. They easily disappear and dissipate. The feelings can seem very strong and can be experienced as either pleasure or pain, and can seem even overwhelming at times. There's really nothing of substance there. And if one identifies with the feelings and gives them an importance and a reality that they don't have, then we're led into all kinds of unwholesome mind states and ultimately into suffering. The unpleasant feelings can lead us into fear and anxiety and despair. The pleasant feelings lead us into bewilderment and craving, confusion. If we identify with them and see them as something important or significant. Sankharas, mental formations, are compared to the trunk of a plantain tree. That is something that looks substantial from the outside but is hollow, is without pith or core. Sankharas means constructed thing. And in the broadest sense, everything in samsara is a sankhara, but in the context of the five khandhas, it refers to those constructions, creations of the mind, thoughts, plans, memories, emotional states, imaginations. All these things are built, constructed within the mind. And it's quite easy for people to be misled by their own constructions, to get lost in the maze of their own creation. thought building on thought. So one is completely lost and has no sense of the center or what is real or what is true. It's really one of the most liberating things you can do, is to see the sankharas for what they are, see them as empty, insubstantial. That they're without substance, they're without reality. They're entirely creations of the mind. Not to be lost in that shadow play. The creative aspect of sankharas, the construction, has its function. It's there for a reason. If we want to do anything, you want to take up any kind of work or project, first you have to construct it in the mind before you can construct it in the material aggregate. And that's using the constructions of the mind so that they are your servant, not your master. But too often we fall into the other way around. We believe they're creations of our mind, and we get led into unproductive, unskillful states of mind, or even bodily action or verbal expression based entirely on the constructions of our mind, the sankharas. One of the most useful things you can do for yourself is to always recognize this is just a creation of my own mind. This is just a construction of the mind. It's not substantial. I don't have to give it any importance. I don't have to believe in it. I don't have to give it any weight or significance. Because it's empty. It's without substance. The last khanda is vijnana, it's consciousness, which is compared to a conjuring trick. Because it's like pulling a rabbit out of the hat. In a way, you could say consciousness is the creator of all that is, at least as far as we experience it. Whatever the external reality may be, we only experience it in the first instance with consciousness, vijnana. And vijnana operates through the sense organs. So we have an image in the eye, we have a sound in the ear, and so on. And that's the incoming information that's passed along to perception. And the two working together create this simulation. So what we are experiencing is essentially a dream, the mind dreaming, but not a free-form dream, but a dream based on the best signals available to us through the sense organs. So these 5 khandas of body, feelings, perceptions, mental formations, and consciousness were said by the Buddha to be the ways in which we create a self. And there ends up being 20 possibilities, because we take the 5 khanda and multiply them by 4, Which you can take any one of the Condos and identify with it and create a self around it in one of four ways. I am consciousness, or consciousness belongs to me, or I am in consciousness, or consciousness is in me. And in every permutation, the error is made of identifying a self in what is essentially without a self-reference. And it's worth trying to think about that and understand what that means, so it's not just an empty phrase. That which has a self means that it has an independence. It can meaningfully be identified as a self-existent entity, and it has an essence, it has a substance. There's some fundamental reality to it that's not affected by anything else. But that which is empty, which has no self, which is how the Buddha understood reality to be, is not independent. It only exists in terms of causes and conditions as a result of other phenomena. It has no permanence. It has no essential essence or real substance. And any point of reality you choose to look at, if you're able to understand it deeply enough and see it in reality closely enough, you'll see that it is, in fact, not a real essence, not a real entity. And there is a subjective and an objective aspect to this. As the Buddha said to Mogaraja, see the world as empty, abandon thoughts of self. Actually, he said three things. Be ever mindful, see the world as empty, and abandon thoughts of self. So beginning with being mindful, being present, then we can see things according to their true nature and not impose categories onto them that don't exist, not impose substantial reality onto things that don't have it. But then there's the two aspects: abandon thoughts of self and see the world as empty. That is the subjective and the objective side. The knower is empty, and so is the known. In this relationship, there's no firm standing. There's no substantial point of reference. We talk about anatta, that generally is referring to the subjective side. There is no self-essence in the person. But that's only a special case of the broader principle of sunyata, which is the emptiness or voidness of all sankharas, internal and external. So the emptiness of things is not something that we impose as a category. It's an inherent reality of all the phenomena. On the contrary, if there's any sense of a substantial entity, any sense of a concrete reality, a independent existent, that is a false conception that we impose with our mind. And it tends to be the way that we see things naively. if we don't examine things closely, if we're not instructed, the common way of seeing things in the world is to see things as substantial, to have a substantial essence. It's a kind of a mental shorthand that allows the mind to organize reality. So on a conventional level, it's not wrong in that sense that it's practical, it's conventional reality, but it becomes problematic and leading to delusion and leading to suffering if one sees that as a metaphysical reality. That amounts to the same thing as believing the formations of the mind. It's significant that in both India and in Greece, there developed some idea of essence and quality. And this is found in Aristotle's philosophy, and it's found in the Indian philosophy. The idea in India is called swabhava, the own essence. And the idea in these philosophies is that anything you choose to examine down to the level of atoms, which is a Greek word meaning the indivisible, the smallest particles, anything you examine will have an essence that's the core of that entity, is a standalone, independent thing that has an ontological existence. And that is colored by various qualities of heat or cool, size and shape, color, fragrance. Extend the list indefinitely. Whereas the Buddha's penetration into that, and his understanding of emptiness, is there's really no need to assume an essence at all. There are just these changing qualities. There's nothing which bears them. So, for example, there is hardness, that's earth element, but there's no thing that is hard. It's just the quality of hardness, or the lack of it, softness. Likewise, heat or cold. There's heat and there's cold, but there is not anything substantial that's either hot or cold. So that's the way emptiness is defined. Emptiness of entities is defined philosophically in the Indian philosophical jargon. I also always find it very intriguing that the more modern science elaborates the physics of the universe, the closer it comes to an Eastern or even a Buddhist view of things. Probably the furthest point of difference between the Eastern and Western understanding would have been the 19th century, with by the end of that century, the physics had developed the atomic theory to the point where the world was seen as composed of little billiard balls in motion. Substantial concrete entities. And that ends up being quite far from the Buddhist view, which would have seemed quite alien and incomprehensible in terms of 19th century physics. But then with the 20th century, with relativity and especially with quantum physics, that billiard ball model was completely transcended. It was seen as only a very crude approximation. That the physical world only exists as a kind of mathematical function without any discrete essence anywhere. And something like an electron only manifests as any kind of reality when it's observed, that is in dynamic relationship with consciousness. And even then it can never be completely pinned down, because if its position is known, then nothing can be known of its momentum. If its momentum is known, nothing can be known of its position. So this is a view of reality that doesn't have discrete entities that can exist without relationship. It doesn't have an essence to anything. Returning to the emptiness of the five khandhas, the point of this in terms of our practice is to free the mind, to liberate the mind from its dependency and its servitude to formations. When we truly see any of the khandha as empty, then we transcend the sense of attachment and aversion that is present when we identify with it as something substantial. And this applies to the body as well as to the mind. And I think particularly useful for practice is to see the mental formations as empty, and never to identify with them as something substantial or ultimately significant. So finally, to return to that statement of the Buddha to Mogaraja, be ever mindful, see the world as empty and abandon thoughts of self. When we take that on as a guiding principle, then we become more and more in touch with that sense of reality as a dynamic interplay between the knower and the known. And there's no substantial point of solidity anywhere in that dynamic relationship. And when that's seen and internalized and made a guiding principle, then it's very liberating. We don't have to let anything oppress us or cause us suffering. We see it all as empty and insubstantial and a result of causes and conditions.